Welcome to this session of the CX Exchange. My guest is Don Bauer, the Chief Technology Officer for Global Talent Management at the State Department. Don, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Glad to be here.
I want to go back to something you said in 2021. I know it's already been 4+ years ago, but it really struck me as I was doing some research before our interview. And you said at the time, HR and IT both ranked at the very bottom of the department with our service delivery and customer service technology. That was a pretty striking comment you made back in 2021, despite the fact the focus and people have looked at HR, people looked at IT, people have looked at customer experience. It's not a new challenge, it's not a new focus for anyone. So here we are 4 years later. What have you done? How much progress have you made? Tell me how things are different.
Well, it's interesting. The survey that I referenced was done in 2017, actually at the onset of the first administration. That was one of the first things the new secretary did did a climate assessment. So we adjusted to that and really started working on improving customer experience. So I guess it's mixed. So our new CIO decided to do a UX survey here recently, and I'll share those results later. It's kind of interesting. Newsflash, we're still at the bottom. But I think what the analytics prove was that people are happy with what we've done, but we're still at the bottom. So, I think ultimately there's always room for improvement. But no, I think we've really, truly focused on, usability. Obviously, accessibility is a big deal, with respect to people with, requiring assistive technology. We really leaned in on that to make sure that as we build out tools and products that they're very accessible. And then more importantly, it's like listening, right? Because a lot of times, you can sit in a room and dream up the best software tool, product, user experience on the planet, and then when it gets out in the field, people are like, who decided this was a good idea, right? So yeah.
I definitely want to hear more about that new survey. When you start to look at the user experience when it comes to IT and HR and the intersection, what stands out to you as what do people expect? I mean, we know, oh, it's got to be on your phone. Oh, it's got to be easy. But,
yeah, exactly.
How have expectations changed that you've seen in that 4-year time frame?
Well, I don't think expectations have changed. If anything, they've gotten more demanding because, as we know, technology is moving much faster than the government does. I think the reality is what I'm facing is most of my systems are 10 to 20 years old. And so how do you present a new modern look and feel to somebody with a tool or a technology that these user experience models didn't even exist when those tools were created, And so, from a technology standpoint, we've done this. We've actually, I guess, what you call it abstraction. So the idea is we put a pretty face on a very old tool. Some call it lipstick on the pig. But the idea is that you can bring all of these modern experiences, the mobile, the responsive, and even the assistive technology support, while still using the existing tool that had all the business logic and intellectual property. A lot of our rules and regulations are very sophisticated, and sometimes it takes many, many years to get a tool that actually can be 100% compliant and actually follow the rules. But majority of people complain because it's very kludgy and cumbersome. And by doing this idea of like just separating the front end from the back end and using a modern front end interface, it buys you time, right? And that's kind of where we went over the last 4 years is we abstracted the front end from the back end. I took my old services, I wrapped them in what they call an API layer, and then magically I'm serving what used to be a really ugly user experience into a more modern and the perception is it's better. But perception only takes you so far.
But perception is sometimes 3/4 of the battle.
It is.
Oh, look, they made it easier. Oh, I can do a drop-down menu and pick vacation, paid family leave, whatever I need, right. Sick leave, versus entering it or thinking of, okay, I have to think of the code. Oh, that's a 302 code versus the 301 code, or I'm making that up, of course. But I think sometimes that's half to 3/4 of the battle. And that tags back to the listening piece you mentioned just a minute ago. Talk a little bit about how you've listened differently when it comes to the user and the customer. Have you created the working groups, the feedback mechanisms? Because you said we're better, but we're still at the bottom. So how do you continue to?
Well, I think at the time that we were when we did that last panel, the State Department had hired 4 customer experience strategists, as you mentioned, Chris, so they brought a new dimension because user experience is not customer experience, all right? And customer experience takes more into account than just the software and the IT. And I feel like that kind of created somewhat of an awakening, or I should say, it's like, oh, wait a minute, we should be doing more of this. And what we found was that user sentiment and things like human-centered design, where you go and you actually, they do these things called greenhouse sessions. Like, you walk into the room, and I liken it to the psychological test they used to give us in the military where they go puppy, lion, and right, you pick one. You don't know why you're picking what you're picking, but at the end they go, you have these tendencies. Well, that's kind of what human-centered design is now, where we are like, okay, if you had no constraints whatsoever, what would you expect, right? And then they do the things like, 6 months from now, if this was perfectly run, what would you expect to be doing with the tool and the product? So this envisioning, I guess. So a lot of these, and if you're like me, I'm a developer, solutions architect by profession. I hear little things in here like, oh, okay, this is how they want to look at it. This is how they want to approach it. So you kind of suss out some of the user needs. And I think the other piece that was a hard lesson learned, and I actually have a kind of a story about that, is you got to understand who your stakeholders are. As much as we think, and I have the unenviable task of having 2 separate sets of users. I have the HR users who use the tools to help serve the employee population, and then you have the employee population. And they actually each have separate expectations. And what you find is if you cater to one or the other, that means the one that you don't cater to suffers, because you either make the employee do extra work or you make the HR person do extra work. So it's a very fine balancing act to try and make your tools and products kind of serve both communities equally well and still have people walk away going, okay, well, that wasn't as painful as I expected it to be.
And of course, you'll never make everybody happy.
Nope.
So you got to find what's the 80% solution, knowing that, okay, and somewhere in that 20%, people may be still a little unhappy, but not perfect. Yeah, tell me the story. You teased me.
So we rolled out a new performance management system, and very touchy subject. And this actually ties into the discussion I mentioned about the more recent survey that we had, because the company that was brought in by our CIO to do our assessment actually helped the Air Force fix theirs, because they did the same thing at Air Force, and performance management was the most hated application in the entire Air Force. Same thing with us. Of course, we have 2 populations, civil and foreign service. So we did this new rollout of this performance management tool. We interviewed everybody on the planet, we thought. We did user acceptance testing. We did dry runs. We did beta testing. We did a fake cycle, right, where we ran through all the steps. And we were so proud of ourselves. We're like, hey, this is going to be phenomenal. And so we roll it out. And people are like, yeah, okay, whatever. Nope, not liking it. And then, of course, that noise started getting louder and louder, and senior leadership started hearing it. Next thing you know, we're getting calls like, hey, what did you guys do to performance management? We're hearing people can't use it and whatever. And then the big bomb dropped. Most of your senior leadership and performance management is you, and then your boss signs off, and then your boss's boss signs off. I mean, it's a very structured hierarchical approval process. Well, we managed to do the supervisor subordinate very well. But we forgot that somebody might have to approve 100 of these things, right? And the actual work required. And then when we found out that the person that was doing those approvals was not even somebody that we had talked to during our design sessions, which was what they call OMSs at the Department of State, which is your executive secretaries and of that. And I don't want to misspeak, but the ones that actually run the show, as we all know, the administrative assistants are the ones that make things happen. We missed them. And when we let one of them look at it, she's like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. And we're like, oh, we're so sorry. So that idea of understanding who your stakeholders are. So we immediately looped when we had somebody in our office that was, had that experience, and she gave us some phenomenal feedback. And we did a lot of iterations and corrections to make the system a little bit more usable at that level. And that was one of those areas. And they're the ones that have the ear of leadership. So you can imagine if administrative assistant starts screaming and yelling about how crappy something is, and it's an undersecretary or a political appointee, they're like, the hammer came down quickly, if you know what I'm saying. So
interesting, and I appreciate you sharing the story, because sometimes folks are hesitant to share stories where things fell short.
It failed. Yeah.
I won't call it a failure, because you probably met some people's needs, just not all people's needs. And But I appreciate you sharing the story because I think that's a good example of the other side of the coin. And let's put a little silver lining on it. Because you developed a new system, it was easy to iterate. It was probably built in a way that was software focused, where these old systems that you were putting the pretty face on weren't built in that way. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, if we have to fix that old system that's 10, 20, 30 years old, that's a much bigger lift than fixing this software probably based system.
Well, truer words were never spoken. When we estimated what it would take to modernize the old platform that was 15 years old, so right in the middle, we were looking at around $4 million of labor to actually reprogram and update that system to represent the more modern requirements on performance management, because as we know, they change, and sometimes the administration drives those changes. And you're absolutely correct. When we shifted, and when I was asked why I did it, because people hate you for changing things, I was like, look, I know I'm going to need to make changes, and they need to go faster, so I pick a platform that can iterate faster. And yeah, exactly, you hit it right on the head. That's exactly why we did it that way. I did it for economic reasons, and I got yelled at for, they hated me because they thought I was, killing the ugly baby.
So I'll just throw the curveball at you a little bit. Roughly, what's the cost of that new system to build? Was it half? Was it 25%?
Funny you bring that up, because, and I know we're not supposed to talk about vendors, so I'll leave it out. We have a low-code platform, and by virtue of the way we've created this new platform, and I've really put a lot of energy into modularity. So things like putting a document in your personnel file, notifications, case management, all of those things that are kind of base. So what we did was we built the performance management on top of an existing workflows that we'd already developed. So, can I say how much it costs specifically? It would be hard because it's a whole program, but we've managed to absorb like 12 or 15 of those types of things into this one platform. Single point of entry, to your point earlier, easy to navigate, responsive, very transparent, so people know where their things are. That's usually the other complaint is I send a ticket in, I don't know where it's at. So all of those get leveraged by this new tool and this new platform. But I would say, I think when I proposed to leadership, it was less than half of the expense, and most people will nod their head and go, okay, that's a wise decision to take this on for the future, because, and here we are in the next administration, and guess what? We had to go in and make changes already. So those savings start adding up over time.
And that's really the key here, because especially when you talk about personnel and performance management, those are constantly evolving. And if it costs you time and energy and money to change, and the more you can shrink that, the better it is in the long run. And then it ends up with a better user experience. People who use it, because like, oh, look, they updated that. Oh, look how easy that is. Versus, okay, we will be shutting down the system for 12 hours on this day because we need to do these things, and because we need to take the system offline and test it and make sure it's secure and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think that's the trade as well. And that's the user experience piece that people don't think about.
They don't. And I think ultimately that's the other thing I feel like that is lost on many when they start like wagging a finger at you going, you guys can do better. You should modernize. I'm like, I'm 24/7, 365 pretty much. Performance management, yes, we are very cyclic, but many of my systems, I can't even shut them down for 12 hours because I'm a global operation. So it's really difficult to modernize something that you have to keep running all the time. So, those are some of the challenges that we face, and, then put a budget constraint on top of that, and it makes it challenging.
Let's pop back over to, you mentioned three things. Listening, we kind of addressed that a little bit. You mentioned usability. Let's talk a little bit about what the usability side of this discussion, of how that kind of fits in to the improving the user experience, the customer experience. What are those discussions like? What are some of the focus areas for you when it comes to usability?
Well, I think that's where our customer experience strategists really start to earn their place in the organization, because, I have a UI UX guy. He's phenomenal. He's got artwork in the Smithsonian. I mean, this guy is great. And then we have our CX folks who they look at the customer journey, and they ask questions like, well, when you come to this application, what is the first thing that you normally do every time you show up to this application? These aren't things you normally don't think about when you're writing software. You say, I have a function. It shall do that function. She asked me, well, should that function be front and center when they first log in, or should that be something that they have to click 2 or 3 levels down to get to? So that's the nuancing of customer, and that it's been an education for me as well of just understanding the questions that get asked of the user when it comes to the user journey and what they're, why did you come here? And then really putting your time and energy into those actions that are accomplished in a more frequent way. So don't spend a lot of energy making something that's done once a year super fancy. When something's done once a week, you should probably put more time into making it more simple and easy to use.
And generally speaking, the software developer does not know, oh, that's done every day versus every couple days or for
Unless
every,
they ask,
unless
right.
we ask. And so you got to ask that. Do you guys have some sort of feedback mechanism where you have focus groups of the users that you come back to, whether it's the same set or multiple sets? I had a interesting conversation with the Navy Deputy CIO recently, and he talked about some new technology they're rolling out, and they created a champions network. And I thought this was a great story because he said there's thousands of people in this champions network. And I was like, how do you manage that? He goes, well, I don't. It's an ad hoc group. They give you feedback when they have time. So it's like he created this kind of way for them to tell, hey, this piece of technology or this system has these problems, so they can go back and fix them. Have you guys set up anything similar to that? Not necessarily thousands of people, but
well, actually, it's close.
Yeah.
So we took an interesting tact. So and what you're really starting to focus in on change management, because ultimately, if you're modernizing, things are going to change. Right. And so the strategy that we took when we rolled out this new platform that we've evolved over the last 4 or 5 years is I did a podcast, internal, right? And it was like a fake interview, which was very cool. I did news blasts, like a weekly newsletter. I did town halls. And then, of course, we do agile development, and I know that's an overused term, and some people hate it, some people love it. But one of the outcomes of agile is that you demonstrate whatever you've accomplished at the end of each development cycle or sprint. What we did was we made that available to everybody. So every time we had a software release come out, you could go and watch the demo. It wasn't like we were in a little room with a door closed, and then when it was done, we popped out and said, here we are. Everybody had a chance. So that kind of created the right relationship with the customers to empower them to feel like they can give us feedback. And then, like I say, even at the CTO level, I'm like, look, if you encounter an issue with one of our systems, here's my email, let me know. So in other words, put myself out front that says, I'm willing to hear your feedback if you have it. And honestly, people are not shy. And when they know there's a pathway by doing it. And then, of course, the closing that loop is, if you get feedback from a user and then they see the result in the software, well, magically they tell their friends, like, look, I gave them feedback, they fixed it. So don't suffer, because some of the tools and products we use, you can't call somebody on the phone and go, this word processing tool is a pain in my butt, could you fix it? Because there's nobody to talk to. Right. So when you're in charge of being able to allow people to give you feedback, and then they see that feedback, there's trust developed. And then all of a sudden, this user sentiment changes, because it used to be, oh, you guys can't get anything right, to, hey, you had a mistake, but we trust you're going to fix it. So the whole perception of the group is better. Our reputation's much better now. I would say our software still has its hiccups and its problems, but because we've created a better relationship with our customers, they're more accepting of our shortcomings because they know we're going to fix it, and we're very transparent. And I think that whole relationship management thing on the customer side has really gained us a lot of goodwill, I guess, with our user base.
You talk about the change management piece, and from a technology person, I mean, that's what we hear for the last 20, 30 years. It's never the technology, it's always the change management, getting people used to it. Have you seen, you told the idea of people more accepting of shortcomings because they say, okay, they will fix it. Just talk a little bit about the feedback you've gotten. Like how have you seen that change? Have you had conversations, even anecdotally, with people who've said, Don, you guys, I always hated your technology, but things have really gotten better, and I really appreciate the fact that, I made a suggestion, it got fixed. Like, has those conversations happened more and more?
They have, and I think ultimately, it's interesting. Many of them don't put it in writing. They will walk by and they go, hey, because what happens is, as we all know, the disgruntled voices typically get the limelight. Yep. So the complainers typically are front and center.
Well, you're telling this to a journalist, right? Disgruntled people, squeaky wheel gets the...
Right, so leadership hears all of the loud people complaining about how crappy things are, and then you look just like, it's not that bad.
So it's okay, it's okay.
Yes, but could you say that publicly for me? So that's one of the areas I think that, from our standpoint, But I had one guy who he said, he goes, I'm an HR guy. He says, every time I go to your main apps page, I have to click 3 times to get to my work. He says, I work there every single day. And because it's self-service for the population. He says, could we do favorites so that I can favorite these things that I do every day because I'm in there every single day? And I went, that's not a bad idea. So I went to my UI guy and he did some mock-ups and I brought it to the team. You would have thought that I had given this guy a pallet of gold. He was like, oh my God, I gave you a suggestion and you listened to me. And I'm like, yeah. I said, it was a good idea. And he says, I guess he kind of basically said it restored my faith and confidence in, and like reaching out, because he just reached out and said, hey, this is kind of it's annoying. It's not, wasn't broken. And we fixed it for him. Now, I will not go into the fact that every single person in my team had an idea what a favorite should be, and we did like 7 iterations of the UI because nobody would decide on which way it would work, but eventually it got out the door. So.
And the fact is, that person feels good about it, and he will or she will say to other people, hey, I made the suggestion, you should make the suggestion, which is exactly what you were trying to get to, because feedback and change management and improvements only come when the user is at that center and the user feels like they're empowered to make those requests.
And we have a relatively good relationship with those, but the other side of that is my entire organization has now taken that kind of approach and attitude. So all of my division chiefs, my leaders, they are now getting feedback from their customers. It's created kind of a very open situation for us organizationally. And then, of course, the outcome is that we work to improve, or in some cases own our mistakes and promise to do better. So
I imagine the biggest challenge, unfortunately, is that you mentioned you have 2 separate types of users. You have the people who do HR and their users, and then the employees themselves. But the employees themselves are so diverse, and you deal with, hey, we have posts and stations and embassies and consulates in places that, okay, how do we make sure they can get access to this piece of technology? Yeah. They have low bandwidth, or they have security issues, or they don't have cell phones, or they only have cell phones that they can access it. So that adds a whole different level of challenges, I imagine, as well. My guest is Don Bauer, the Chief Technology Officer for Global Talent Management at the State Department. I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the CX Exchange.